afternoon. My name is Alan Croker. I'm an architect from Sydney, Australia, and I specialise in working with old buildings, significant buildings, not necessarily old buildings, in doing conservation, heritage conservation and adaptive reuse, also new structures in combination with conservation work. My firm is called Design 5 Architects, and we have been going for 25 years, and that's our area of specialty and expertise. I've been practicing in architecture now for 45 years, and I have been working with Sydney Opera House Trust as their conservation or the heritage conservation architect since the beginning of 2004. The Opera House has been a passion of mine ever since it was under construction, beginning in the 1960s. And to be involved with it now as the architect advising on these matters is one of those dreams that you never think would actually come to fruition, but it has. So it's a challenging project. There are lots of issues, and we have devised various ways to address those issues, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So the title of this presentation, Conserving a Modern Masterpiece, Managing Change at Sydney Opera House, is really talking about how we look after this building as a modern masterpiece, but how we manage change in the face of all of the issues and demands that are on this building. So if I can now begin, I'll just show you, this is a very brief list of the areas that we will cover. Jorn Utzon's vision and Peter Hall's completion. I'll explain who they are in a minute, why the place is important, but then how we manage change and the documents that are in place to assist us in managing change. Then I'll also talk about changes that have occurred in the past, and some of these are very dramatic changes. You may be surprised. And what are the present projects that are underway? And then a little note at the end, which is basically a warning of how we should be ever mindful of the challenges that might arise. So if I can just, I hope you can't hear this, it's raining outside and I'm in my attic studio, but the rain is softened by the insulation. The design and construction of the Opera House, it came about as a result of an international competition in 1956 for a national opera house on Bennelong Point. And there were 222 entries received from 28 countries. One of those entries was from a Danish architect, Jorn Utzon, and his design was selected as the winner in 1957. So he commenced work on the project immediately. And then in 1959, they commenced construction on site, really before they knew how to build the structure. That was quite challenging, but it was a political move. Then in 1966, when it was under construction and about the stage where this photograph is, with the shells partially built, but none of the interiors worked on at all, but he was forced to leave the project. That's a long story in itself. And then the project was taken over by a consortium of 3 architects, Peter Hall, Lionel Todd and David Littlemore. They completed the project, and in 1973, the place was opened. So from the time the place opened, there were a number of things that were changed at the building, and people just treated it as an ongoing functional building. But there was worldwide recognition that this was a very, very significant building. And in Australia, we knew it was a significant building, but that was becoming increasingly obvious with international calls for nomination for it to be listed on the World Heritage List, even in its very early stages. So in 1993, a colleague of mine, in fact, my predecessor in this present role, Dr. James Semple Kerr, was commissioned to draw up a conservation management plan to guide its conservation and ongoing use. In 1999, I was involved with Jim Kerr in drafting the second edition of that conservation plan, but it was not published because in the same year, Jorn Utzon, the original architect who was forced off the site in 1966, he was re-engaged by the New South Wales government, and he remained re-engaged until he passed away in 2007, I think it was. In 2002, Jorn Utzon, with the assistance of a leading architect here in Australia by the name of Richard Johnson, developed the design principles for his original concept and its ongoing use, and they're called the Utzon Design Principles. 2003, then the conservation plan was revised again by Jim Kerr following this re-engagement of Utzon and was republished as the third edition. Then 2003, at the end of 2003, it was listed on a State Heritage Register. 2005, National Heritage List. 2007 was inscribed on the World Heritage List. And in 2017, I was the author of the fourth edition of the Conservation Management Plan, which is the one that's currently used. And we'll talk about that further. Now, just to explain a little bit about my passion and involvement with the place, on the left is an image that was taken in 1962 from the Manly ferry crossing the harbour on my old Brownie box camera, black and white photograph that I took of the stage one of the Opera House under construction. And then in 1970, I by then had a decent reflex camera and single lens reflex camera, and I took this photograph of the interiors and the glass walls under construction. Then in 1973, before the opening in October 1973, they had some public tours and there were also performances. So I went on a couple of these public tours and I took photographs in the house and also views across the harbour you can see here. And the spaces were spectacular. Everybody was totally blown away by this interior of this building, and its reputation really began from there. Now, a little bit about Jorn Utzon. He was an architect in Denmark. He was a young architect at the time, and his father was a naval architect. He designed boats and built boats. But he was the original architect for Sydney Opera House from the time he won the competition until he was forced off the project in 1966. It is said he resigned, but it was actually a forced resignation. And then he was re-engaged in 1999 until his death in 2008. I said 2007 before, that was incorrect. It's 2008. And then the architects who were appointed to complete the project, and they, I have to say, were trying to get Utzon re-engaged on the project after he was forced off. So they took this project on reluctantly, but they were Peter Hall on the left, David Littlemore in the middle, and Lionel Todd on the right. And Peter Hall was the architect who was responsible for the design of the interiors. He had worked in the government architect's office and was an architect of some note and had done some wonderful work here. And he completed the interiors of the project to a changed program or a changed brief. And the major hall in the whole complex was originally meant to be a multi-purpose theatre, but it was altered to be a dedicated concert hall. And this is the interior that Peter Hall had done. There's a whole story about where that design came from, but I can tell you that the research we did for this fourth edition of the Conservation Management Plan confirmed that Peter Hall was doing his absolute utmost to try and continue the vision that Jorn Utzon had for the interiors of this project and to fulfill those to the best of his ability. That was not really understood until we did this research. So the concert hall is the largest space in the complex. The next largest space, what was called the minor hall, is now the Opera Theatre, the Joan Sutherland Theatre. That's the interior for it. That's also Peter Hall. And then when the building opened, there was not sufficient money to complete the forecourt properly. So the forecourt was actually a car park and it was all covered in bitumen, and it was not a very fitting entry to the building, but that's the way it was until 1988 when, or 1987 actually, when the government commissioned the Public Works Department in collaboration with Peter Hall, the original architect for the interiors, to design the lower concourse, this spot you see in front of you here, and to pave the whole of the forecourt. And only when that was completed could we achieve a vehicle-free entry forecourt to the whole precinct and have all of these restaurants and other facilities on a lower level so they wouldn't intrude on this magnificent view of approach to the Opera House. And so now we have the forecourt and the steps and the building as Jorn Utzon originally envisaged. And you see it there in its setting, which is on the World Heritage List. And almost all of the area that you see in this image is part of the World Heritage Buffer Zone. It includes the harbour bridge, includes the harbour around. And this Opera House sits on this peninsula called Bennelong Point, which protrudes out into Sydney Harbour, giving it 360-degree views. It's an extraordinary site, and it has a history that goes back prior to the British occupation of New South Wales in 1788. But Utzon's vision for this building was that it be approached from the city or from the water, but you should approach from the city on the right of this diagram here. You go across a level forecourt where it's completely flat. There are no objects, no structures on that forecourt. And then you rise up the podium and you go up to the top of what is a man-made peninsula. And that peninsula is actually a man-made version of the rocky headland, which is immediately on the right-hand side where it says Royal Botanic Garden. And the top of that man-made peninsula and the natural peninsula are about the same. So you go across this space, which is almost like a meditation space, a prelude to the arrival experience of the house. You progress up the stairs, and when you arrive at the top of that platform, you then enter the building and you walk around the auditorium, always with views to the harbour and the context of this site. And you then turn around and you go into the auditorium, and that is where the performance takes place. And all of the performers themselves, all of the preparation, the set making, everything, all the costume making takes place within that man-made peninsula, the podium, and is then brought up via lifts onto the top of the podium where the performance is. So it's a celebration of performance. That is the whole idea of this building. It is about celebrating and elevating the idea of performance. So it's not just an architectural monument. It is, in fact, a place to house and celebrate performance. So if you were to take performance away from this structure and just have it as an architectural monument, it would lose its soul. It would actually just be a piece of sculpture without meaning. And I can tell you from experience that when you go to a performance there, then you get it. To have a world-class performance in this building and then come out from that performance onto the podium in this extraordinary environment, the whole idea of Utzon's vision comes together, and it is made really, really clear. And everybody can enjoy it. It's meant to be a place for all of the population, not just we people who live in Sydney, not just people who live in Australia. It's for the world. And there are a number of venues here, and this is just a list of all of them. The largest of our venues is the forecourt. It holds 6,000 people, and I was down there today and they were preparing for some concerts on the forecourt because the concert hall itself is closed for a major upgrade. And that, so they're holding large concerts on the forecourt just at present to allow that to happen, all within a COVID-safe environment as well. But it has huge strains on it in terms of use, 7 main venues, 8.2 million visitors a year. This is pre-COVID. When we shut down, there were none. 2,400 events a year. And then there's guided tours, there's restaurants and bars. It's a huge complex. So it actually risks being overused. So how do we manage the demands on that place? Now, in terms of managing the place, in 2002, the Utzon design principles were put together that I mentioned before, using Jorn Utzon's own words. all the stuff that he'd written from the time that he did the competition right through to his, just before this was published. He wrote a number of essays and articles about the place, and a lot of this was compiled together to form the design principles. So that sets out Utzon's vision. And then there's the conservation management plan, which is regularly revised, updated to reflect the changing circumstances of the building, the changing pressures on the building. And that the present version is the 4th edition. It's called Respecting the Vision, and it's about the method for conserving and retaining Utzon's vision. Now, these are a couple of pages that are these are screenshots from the design principles document. And here Utzon talks about all the different principles about the building. And this page is particularly about geometry and the role that geometry plays in the ordering of the building, in its design, the way the materials are laid, the way the tiles are laid on the shelves. All of these things come from a very strict adherence to a geometric order. And then it goes right through to things like the forecourt should not be cluttered with any new buildings or any structures of any size. He gives all sorts of guidance and ideas about how you could manage pressures for new functions and new spaces. So with the Conservation Management Plan, which we just call CMP4 for short, the 4th edition, we did a whole lot of research, and particularly on Peter Hall's role in completing the project. And we then revised what was known about the significance of the place from all the different listings, and we added to that our research, and we came up with these really key points here. It's a masterpiece of 20th century architecture and a world-renowned performing arts centre. Its unparalleled design, form and inspired response to its peninsula Sydney Harbour location. It's an internationally recognised landmark, an architectural icon, a symbol of Sydney and Australia. It's a focus for national celebrations and events. It's a monumental sculpture in the round, both by day and night. And its relationship to the harbour and the city, and its approach and arrival sequence, which I described before, are fundamental to understanding. It provides an exceptional experience for users and visitors. It created a truly remarkable place, a structure that celebrates the human experience of the performing arts, as well as of the place itself. It's a performance in itself as a three-dimensional object. And this last one is a really important point. And I see this every day when I'm there, and I spent most of today there, to be honest. It has the ability to encourage and inspire the pursuit of excellence and innovation in those who use it, who are or are associated with it. All are inspired to achieve an outcome worthy of the Sydney Opera House. It doesn't matter whether it's an electrician, whether it's a person repairing a concrete patch, doing the cleaning, putting on a performance, making a set, a violinist, a dancer, all are inspired to achieve this excellence. And I see this in talking to people every day when I'm there. It's a remarkable place. Then in the CMP, we then list, this is a process that we have in Australia, and it comes from a document which you may be aware of called the Borough Charter, which is our set of guidelines and principles about how conservation planning and how conservation management decisions should be made. It's not a do's and don'ts document, it's about a process. And in this process, once we've understood what's important about a place, we then list those things that are important, which I just showed you, and then go through the various parts of the place and give them a ranking as to what that significance might be. So the roof shells, the podium exterior, the broadwalk forecourts, all of those are of the exceptional significance. They're the most important. But the lower concourse, which is a later addition, is of a lower significance. It's a B. The covered concourse and original space is an A. And then it goes right, this list goes right through to the back of house and performing areas. So the green room, which is a very important space for all of the people who work at the house, whether they be technicians or whether they be performers or management, that's an important place where everybody comes together, and it's right on the centre line of that building. It's very important. So that's a significant space, and that's more important than, say, the corridors or the administration areas behind that. Now, the most important part of the document, and arguably the thickest part of the document, is about conservation policy. And this conservation policy is put together in a certain manner. It's a fully integrated framework, and there's three main parts of the information. There's first of all, a discussion around the background and the issues. Then there are specific policies arriving from discussion, and for the sake of clarity and usability for the document, and to make it look sort of more attractive for users, the policies are put in blue boxes. And there's lots of photographs in this document too. I know from experience, don't give an architect a book with no pictures in it. They won't read it. And that goes for a lot of people. If you're going to make these documents attractive and make them usable and people want to engage with them, you have to work on the graphics of it and make it something which is attractive to use. It's an exciting thing to pick up and read a particular section on one of the venues or some aspect about the use of the place. If it's all just text, it's boring, it'd be put on a shelf. You may as well nail it over a hole in the roof to keep the water out. That's how useful it'll be. And the other most important part of this is the guidance on managing change. And here we have not graded the significance of all the little parts of the building. We have given tolerance for change tables and opportunities for change to identify any potential changes in the building. So it provides a guidance and direction for design projects, looking at change. It's not frozen. You can't say with the Opera House and a building which is particularly got the demands for operational use like this building does have, you can't say it can't change. That's not possible. If you do that, the change will go elsewhere, because change, any ongoing use requires change to keep up with the demands, whether it be changes in technology, whether it be changes in codes and compliance, whether it be change in patrons or visitor demands. All of these things require some change to occur. How do you manage those? That is the key principle. So the whole objective behind this fourth edition was about how to manage change. And then it's really important that none of these are read in isolation. You have to look at the whole lot together. Just briefly go through and show you some quick snapshots out of this CMP. This is key policies here. The world, national and state heritage values must be retained and respected and be managed into the future and protected. The primary use of the building as a performing arts centre is also to be retained and respected. So in these two policies, you actually get the apparent conflict between these two things. The building as a world-class masterpiece of modern architecture and its ongoing use. And people often see these in conflict, but they are not in conflict. They are completely enmeshed. They cannot be taken apart, because if you took one apart from the other would suffer. It would not be the place that it is without either of those things. So we have to manage it with that in mind. Then the policies go down into, this is the discussion here, there's design quality. We even talk about leases and how they are to be managed, the boundaries of leases, uses and functions externally, right down to furniture, what sort of furniture is appropriate. And some of these photographs here are put in to show things which are not working properly and needs to be managed and improved. So we haven't shied away from the problems that we have. We're trying to address those, and we just say, these are issues. We need to learn from these and do things better, and how can we improve on it? Another key thing about the conservation plan is that both Utzon, the original architect, and Peter Hall, who came after him, need to be both respected in any conservation work here. But ultimately it is Utzon's vision which is the most important of these, and Peter Hall sits underneath that. And so there are a set of policies here about how that is to be managed and how you make decisions. And only today I've been down at the house trying to work out whether we change one particular handrail for compliance issues, whether we follow Peter Hall's or Utzon's vision for these things. And these policies help us to guide this. And then there are policies there for minor changes and major changes. And if it's a major change, say one of the venues becomes unusable because of certain demands on it, maybe functional demands or accessibility demands, it could be completely replaced with a new design, but in accordance with the Utzon design principles. And then, so this is what this is about here. Utzon's concepts and design regimes must be retained and respected. So that's in considering any modification or change. And then there's hybrid Utzon hall spaces, and then there are Peter Hall spaces. One of the things that we found most difficult to manage is external events. Because when they started open slather, there were no limits on how many people this place could accommodate. And basically it was Australia's favorite outdoor venue. And there were massive concerts there. It was huge. And this is how they used to be managed. They put all of these structures on the steps, and then you couldn't see the building. This was what Utzon's vision was, but in that previous image, you could see you weren't able to appreciate that. One of the things we did in the conservation management plan is to draw up guidelines for how to manage this setting, but still accommodate major activities and events on the external areas, particularly the forecourt, but also the broad walks on the northern end and on the western side. So there are very, very serious guidelines there, and these images from the conservation management plan show the extent of those infrastructure zones for major events, how the setups can be managed. This is how we used to do the setup. This is 2008 for a concert. This is more recently, 2018, and you can see that the whole stage structure has been moved towards the southeast, excuse me, and that enables the visitor who is not going to a concert, not going to this outdoor event, can still get their once-in-a-lifetime view of this building without having all these horrible structures in front of it. And then we also had some horrible structures on the north side of the building. There's a marquee structure that was there. It gradually grew from tables and chairs with umbrellas to then be connected, and it became an outdoor venue for hire. And internally, the adjacent space, which had been a restaurant, was used for catering. In 2 years ago, yes, we revamped all of those spaces inside and we opened them up. In accordance with those guiding principles and policies that are in the conservation management plan. The marquee is gone. Now we can have venues for hire within the building, and you can have these wonderful celebratory events, whether it be an event, it might be a wedding, it could be a celebration of some major function to do with the Opera House. It could also be a public event or a conference, all within the Opera House with its own identity particular to this, but participating in the view. A very early change which happened in the building, and it was the first one that happened after Utzon was re-engaged, was the change of the reception room, which was fitted out by Peter Hall, to the Utzon room, which was, the interior was completely designed by Jorn Utzon, including this tapestry on the western wall, facing out towards the water. The whole lot was stripped and redone. So it was the first and really only complete interior designed by Utzon. Jorn Utzon also designed this colonnade, which was added to the side of the building in 2006 to conceal some new openings to a consolidated western foyer for some venues which were added because of the change of use and some additional space which became available. This was when the building was still under construction. So this colonnade was very contentious at the time, still is, but it deals with shading, heavily shading the openings in the western foyers without making the whole of this solid podium look like it's a curtain wall or an office building. More recently, an underground loading dock has been put underneath the forecourt and under the southern part of the Opera House, deep underground, and that has been since the forecourt was paved. So that's where all the major entry is. And now we have a completely vehicle-free address to the building, and all the trip hazards have been removed, and now it is really a place for pedestrians. So internally, going back to the conservation plan, each section deals with a particular part of the building or a particular aspect of it. And here we have a section to deal with the foyer surrounding the major auditoria, some photographs there describing what is happening, and all of the blue text on the right-hand side there is direct quotes from Jorn Utzon, either from the design principles or from other things that he's written. And the significance of these spaces is exceptional, level A. There's discussion about what the issues are, and then it's summarized in a policy. These are the key things that must be retained and respected. And then there are these tolerance for change tables, which look at each part of that foyer and say, okay, we have here the glass wall system, which encloses the foyers, which hangs from the shells. And we look at that in terms of what's its form, what does its form, fabric, function, and location play in supporting the significance of the place, supporting this exceptional significance of this space. And the form could be changed because it's not the original design by Utzon. It was a later design by Peter Hall, and even he had some not misgivings, but he had some concerns about some of the resolution of this. The fabric could be changed. The glass is old quality glass. It could be should be upgraded really to provide better thermal performance and light protection. The function of it is really important. So that's got a 1, low tolerance for change. Its location also a 1, low tolerance for change. And then we look at all the other sections of it. There's the guardrails, etc. Their form, it could be changed, and this can be upgraded with compliance issues. So the original profiles no longer comply, but they can be changed to comply. But the most important thing is that they should be bronze. So this 1 here is to do with the bronze. That's the fabric. The function, they could change because they were just grab rails, but now they have an additional thing to do with accessibility. Their location is very important. That's a 1. So these things give us guidance for change and set the priorities for change. And all of the intrusive items are listed there. There's the things that we haven't got right yet that we can improve on. And then the opportunities for change. We could look at these lower ones here. We could provide level access between the foyer levels, because according to our legislation here, if we do not have equitable access for people with any form of mobility issue, then we are not complying with the law. We must provide equal access to those all parts of the theatre. So level access compliance was not an issue when the building was opened in 1973, but it is now. And if we don't comply with this, we could risk shutting down those theatres, and we would no longer be able to use this building for its intended function. So how do we achieve this compliance without wrecking the place and still complying with Utzon's vision? And then there's, there could be lifts, there could be tunnels. Now, one of the keys that's happening right now, the project in the concert hall, is to do with accessibility issues. So this was continuously wide stair up until February 2020, when we closed the concert hall and all its foyers for this upgrade. It will open in around February 2022. And at present, this passage is being constructed. I was in there today. It's been cut through the stair, and there's been a lot of said, this is vandalism, you cannot do this. But let's look at what Utzon proposed himself when he designed an upgrade for the minor hall, the present Joan Sutherland Theatre, which has had huge problems in terms of compliance and acoustics and function, all of those things. He designed passages at level 2, what we call level 2, at the main foyer level, and at level 3 up here. And in fact, this passage that I'm now pointing to with the cursor, that passage was in his original design, but it was built over with stairs. It was in the structure, but it's buried in the structure, and it was never built. I hope you can't hear that rain outside. It's heavy rain here. And what we have done in this upgrade work, we are building a lift which connects all of the levels of the northern foyer, connects this northern passage, and allows somebody in a wheelchair or a walking frame, or somebody who's just got a bad knee and can't go up the stairs, can walk through this level. They get through to the northern foyer and they can go up this lift, which is a glass box, and they can come on all levels. They can access all the bathrooms, the bars, the lounges, everything. And I was inside this lift shaft today. It's under construction, and we're getting ready to fit the glass box and all of the bronze lift infrastructure into this framework. So on the lower levels, this is what it's going to look like. And we have had to cut through some beams here. These are huge changes. And without the sort of guidance that we've had in this conservation management plan and an understanding of what Utzon's vision was, we could not have gone forward with confidence. We could not have justified what we're doing. And we might also, without understanding that original vision, we might have made an awful mess of it and really damaged the significance of the place. So these beams are now cast. They've been beautifully made. This lift shaft is here. And everything's there basically bar the purple carpet and the bronze cladding. This is in the minor theatre. This is a completed lift that opened a couple of years ago for the Joan Sutherland Theatre. And this is another glass box that comes up and lands on the top level. And I've been in this area and I've ridden this lift, but I've been in this area and seen somebody come up here in a wheelchair who's never been able to access these foyer spaces before. And they come up in this glass box, they look straight up into the ribs for the shells above, and it is quite an exceptional experience. So the type of experience that we as able-bodied people have had before now is available to everybody. So it really, what was originally intended to be the people's house, which could celebrate performance, could celebrate the engagement with performance by everybody. The upgrade project in the concert hall. On the left is the concert hall as it was prior to the shutdown, the beginning of last year. And it had these reflective, what we call donuts, these donut-shaped acrylic clouds suspended in the space for acoustic purposes, but they were never really successful. And then we trialed with full-size mock-ups another reflector system on the right using panels of folded timber and reflectors on the side. And all of this infrastructure here is to hold up these prototypes. We also tested tiered seating or tiered arrangements for the orchestra and any performers here. And we trialed a whole lot of things. And once we got everything right, we had acoustics engineers, we had everybody there. We went right back to the design principles because we had to satisfy ourselves that this was going to fit with those principles and was still going to be an Utzon space completed by Peter Hall and still celebrate performance. And all the way along, the approach to change, the main driving principle is to do as much as necessary, but as little as possible. This is a core principle that is set down in the Australia ICOMOS Borough Charter. And I'm quoting Utzon below here, as time passes and needs change, it is natural to modify and change to suit the needs and techniques of the day. These changes, however, should be such that the original character of the building is maintained. And in the center of this photograph, between those two bits of text, you can see a prototype of a new panel on the front of this box front, which is what we call a diffusion panel. And it has a ripple pattern on it in solid timber to improve the acoustics inside this hall. So all of these fronts of these boxes have been taken off, and this panel, the first parts of this are now in place. They've already been fitted. And so this is the minimum we could do to achieve this excellence in acoustic performance. So the timber remains as Australian brush box, but the form and shape of these boxes has always been an acoustic consideration. And again, it's responding to an updated understanding of acoustics. So this is the architect's CGI or computer-generated image of what the finished interior will look like. It looks very clinical, but it's still a really celebratory space. And there is another set of infrastructure which will be able to be automatically deployed for amplified performance. This is the setup for acoustic performance, i.e. orchestras or people who do not require amplification, talks and things like that. So we have now addressed all of these things, and those, I'll just go back to that last slide here, those reflectors are solid timber because we require the mass of that to do the reflection, the acoustic reflection. And putting the color on that was somewhat contentious, but it achieves what was originally intended for these interior spaces. And this was by Utzon. He wanted to have these big tapestry curtains in these major halls. And there was a huge tapestry curtain made for the minor hall, the Joan Sutherland Theatre. And that was made, but it's since been taken down and put into storage because it was starting to fall apart. But these are wonderful pieces. They still exist. This one, the Coburn curtain for the Joan Sutherland Theatre, will be hung each year for a day or two within this space. But this idea of going into the auditorium, where that's where Utzon had intended that the explosion of colour would happen. The performance was really about the space itself as well as what was on the stage. So the use of colour in these venues is very important. And now, just as a postscript, I'm just almost finished here. Recently, in 2019, the government, who owns this building, you know, it's owned by the public, the Australian public, but the government has a title to it. Unfortunately, you know what politicians are like. They think they own the building, they can do with it what they want. And the Minister for Racing wanted to project a horse race, or the selection of the horses for a new horse race, onto the sails of the Opera House as a light installation. And the public were totally furious about this. And there was a demonstration, which I was part of. So were all my friends there. And we all went down there the night that this projection was to occur. And we have guidelines in place to try and stop this from happening. And protesters came with their placards, and we all shone torches there to try and blank out these projections. And on the left is the press, which is covering this. And this is the Murdoch press. So it was favouring the racehorses rather than the Opera House, whereas the other press was actually favouring the Opera House. But one thing that it brought out for the first time ever was the social value that this house has for everybody. Suddenly there were thousands of letters to the press. There were articles everywhere. There were people expressing their views on radio and on television. There were demonstrations, all saying, you cannot do this. This is our house. It does not belong to the politicians. This house belongs to the public. And it was paid for by a public lottery. The public paid for its construction, not the government. So it's always had this feeling of it being a public building. And this public involvement, this public ownership of this place is probably its greatest ally, and really make sure that it will survive into the future. And we have to value that, we have to understand it, and really still be able to make the changes to the place to allow everybody to come there and enjoy it for its beauty, its spectacular performances, its architecture, everything. It's just an extraordinary place. So I'd like to end there. I find it very hard to talk about the Opera House without showing some passion for it, because I'm a regular subscriber to performances here and dance and all sorts of things here. It's just a wonderful place. If ever you come to Australia, please come and visit. And if you can, go to a performance there. Thank you.